Welcome back to our ecology discussion. Today's discussion is going to be about populations, how we measure them, why it's important, how they grow, and different models used to figure out what populations are all about. So, first of all, how you measure a population can take on many different forms. You can measure the size of the population, basically, how many of that individuals of that species are in that area. Not very difficult to do. You can do it in a variety of ways. Now, density is a little bit harder and gives you a little bit better idea. And this picture shows you the density, human population density in the United States. The dark blue are high density dense areas, and the yellow towards the pale yellow are the less dense areas. And it's basically if you have a certain amount of area, it's how many people are in there per unit, per land area unit. So if you notice on the East Coast, it's a lot more densely populated. Basically, a lot more people in a smaller amount of land. The next way you can measure population is dispersion. Dispersion patterns are important because if you're trying to figure out the size and density of a population, you should know how they're laid out in an area. So the three different dispersion patterns are clumped, uniform, and random. Now, as you see in these pictures, they take on different forms, and different organisms usually have different dispersion patterns. So clumped would be like a school of fish because they group together. Random are often plants that use wind in order to pollinate because they just land wherever and grow. And then uniform, or also known as even, is when things really don't actually like each other. Humans often are uniform within the city. So if you look at a city, you have your blocks, and those are uniform. So you have each house has, say, a quarter of an acre on it, and each house is within there. And so they're uniformly or evenly distributed. Now, it's important to know this for size and density purposes, and when you, as a human, are trying to figure out how many fish are in a pond. So if you count a little area of that pond and say, I saw 2 fish. Well, if you didn't realize that fish clump together, you might think that there are a lot more fish in that pond. Or if you just saw a clump of fish, that might be the only clump of fish in that pond. So it's very important to figure out dispersion patterns before trying to figure out the size of that population. Now, the other thing that we're going to look at more specifically are the growth patterns. And if we continue on, you'll see that there are different ways populations grow. And there's a variety of different ways of looking at it. And so we're going to look at the logistic for exponential growth, which is the most basic, and then look at growth cycles and survivorship curves. So you have your growth, your graphs. And if you look at these two different, exponential versus logistic, you'll notice some very easy, quick things that are different. First, there's the logistic levels off, and it levels off at something known as the carrying capacity, and that is the maximum population that size a population can get without overusing its resources. So an exponential growth is when a population grows too rapidly, and what will usually happen is it turns into what's known as a boom and bust cycle, which we'll get into. Whereas logistic growth is able to even off and level off and probably sustain that population size for a long period of time. So the exponential growth, unfortunately, usually follows a boom and bust cycle, as this graph shows. Now, a boom and bust cycle, as you see, it booms, it grows exponentially, and then busts, it dies quickly. And then it booms, and then it busts. So it's not based off of any other populations, it's just the fact that it's growing too fast, and then there's no more resources, so it dies. Whereas the next cycle, which is the predator-prey, they rely on each other. So here, as the predator increases in size, the population, the prey actually decrease because there are too many of, say, the wolves eating the deer, so the deer population decreases. Then there aren't enough deer for the wolves, so the wolves start dying off. And then there aren't that many wolves, so the deer population rises, and so on, so forth and so on. It keeps cycling through. So these are the two main growth cycles that kind of go along with your exponential growth. Is basically there's nothing keeping it at its carrying capacity, so it grows and then dies, and then grows and then dies. But it's important to understand these interactions and ways that populations grow, because it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's part of the homeostatic environment of that ecosystem. So the important parts of this is that we need to know how a population grows, so we don't think that it's going to completely die off if it just happens to be in a bust cycle. And same thing with a boom cycle. Sometimes it's just lots and lots of that organism because, as you see in this picture, sometimes there's nothing there and things need to grow rapidly, but they'll eventually level off or they'll bust. So if we know how to measure things properly, if we know how to sample properly, and know how all of these measurements and timelines affect us and the ecosystem surrounding it, we can make a better educated guess as to what's going to happen, especially with what's happening with our human population today.